This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The fight to end polio and contain Ebola made tougher by rising violence. Sudan's military council and opposition agreed to a 3-year transitional period. And UN aid agencies concerned about the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Libya. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. With me is Uche Okoronko with a preview of your business news.
Thanks, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa vows to speed up economic reforms to lure investors. And Dangote Refinery gives 120 local contractors about $368 million worth of contracts. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, we start the hour by taking a look at a new report from the Safeguarding Health in Conflict Coalition. It says attacks on healthcare workers in conflict zones have risen marginally. According to the latest figures, in the year 2018 saw 973 attacks on healthcare providers, in which 167 workers were killed in 23 countries. And as Laura Walubengo reports, the biggest scare lies in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the fight against the spread of Ebola has been scaled down due to insecurity.
In January 2018, a suicide bomber drove an ambulance loaded with explosives through a checkpoint in Afghanistan. The explosion that followed killed 95 bystanders. In February, 13 hospitals supported by Médecins Sans Frontières were bombed in Syria's East Ghouta. In Nigeria's Borno state, Boko Haram militants attacked a camp for internally displaced persons and killed 3 aid workers, one of whom was a doctor working for UNICEF. These are some of the attacks targeting health workers that the Safeguarding Health in Conflict Coalition says is part of acts of impunity that are being perpetuated by armed combatants in conflict zones. According to the report, 973 attacks left 167 medical practitioners in conflict zones dead. 710 others were injured. This number contrasts marginally with 2017, in which 701 attacks were recorded. Countries that lead in violence targeting healthcare providers in conflict zones include the occupied Palestinian territories with 308 cases and Syria, which recorded 257. These two are followed by Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, Central African Republic, Pakistan, Somalia, Cameroon and Sudan. In these nations, administering of polio vaccines has been hampered by the threats on healthcare workers. Perhaps the most chilling of this reality is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Violence targeting health workers by armed militias has seen many organizations scale down intervention against the spread of Ebola. A disease has so far killed over 1,000 people, and the number could rise. With Ebola spreading unabated, the Safeguarding Health in Conflict Coalition is fearing that the disease might spread even to neighboring countries, just like the violence that is rampant in the affected North Kivu province. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Well, let's take a closer look at this issue. Now joined by Dr. Tui Mebawondu, a health expert and medical doctor based in Lagos, Nigeria. Doctor, thank you so much for your time this evening. These are very, very worrying trends in terms of these attacks on healthcare workers. What would you say are some of the key factors that are accounting for the rise in attacks on healthcare workers?
Thank you for having me. The first casualty during any humanitarian crisis is the health system. We see increased diseases, we see more people are being attacked, we see health workers being killed. Now, with the rise of non-state actors in the armed conflict, we're now seeing quite a lot of people being killed, health workers being killed, ambulance being attacked, and hospital being burnt down. So the rise of non-state actors, in fact, the world has recently become more turbulent in terms of violence escalating. We're seeing from every point the dialogue on how to protect health workers is not being firmed up. Yes, even the resolution 2286 is not being adhered to strictly. And then we're not seeing convergence between the military at different states and the Foreign Affairs Ministry and other humanitarian groups working together in synergy to prevent attack on health workers. And we can see until we increase the surveillance, we may not get the result we're looking for.
And indeed, in the meantime, communities are bearing the brunt of this failure to address this challenge. What would you say then is the major impact that this is having on treating Ebola outbreaks and such things?
Yes, again, obviously, when you attack health workers, the first thing is that you are going to discourage those critical health workers needed in that area to go back and work. Secondly, you are going to increase the risk of disease spreading, and then even the local people who are supposed to access health care in different centers will be reluctant to go out to this health center. And then the critical infrastructures that cost a lot of money to build and maintain will be compromised. Now, what we're going to see, like in Congo and even in parts of Nigeria, is the fact that the ability to curtail Ebola and prevent the spread of that Ebola will be seriously hampered. For us to respond to this challenge of health, we need health workforce, we need infrastructure, we need to move materials to those remote areas, and we need health workers to do those things. With the attack on health workers, we're sure that our ability to fight the spread of those epidemics and even curtail the disease like polio will be seriously hampered. And it's a dialogue that we must continue to have if we need to have the necessary results in health.
I mean, you spoke about this violence being the activities of non-state actors, and that's something that will take a very long time to fix in some cases. So in the meantime, or at least in the short term, what can be done to try and stop these attacks?
Now, we need to go back to the protocol, because the access to health during conflict is a humanitarian issue. Now, apart from the United Nations, who needs to actually reiterate and push this thing, people that are selling arms, or the country that are supporting some violent extremist group, or people that are really, responding for this attack, must be brought to book. There must be a systematic way where we can challenge them and tell them, for instance, that the criminal court is waiting for you should you then attack health workers. We need to raise the capacity of the local team. We must take health care delivery, or even the issue of human resources for health, as local as possible, especially in the area of conflict, because people will tend to limit the conflict when a lot of local people are involved. So again, we must be able to create protocol for protection of those health workers during their work, and then the health institutions during conflict, and hold people accountable. The United Nations needs to increase surveillance. We need to increase surveillance. The surveillance system for an attack on health system needs to be increased, so that as much as possible we keep reporting and keep holding people accountable for any infractions against health workers in the course of doing their duties.
Dr. Tui Mebawondu, thank you so much, joining us there from Lagos, Nigeria. Now, the African Union says Sudan is making progress towards a much-needed political transition. Sudan's military council and civilian representatives have agreed to a 3-year transitional period before power is fully restored to civilians. Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
The 3-year joint leadership between the military and civilians in Sudan is not what the African Union had hoped for. It wanted a transitional government fully led by civilians. But it now says the new deal is at least the beginning of the return of constitutional order in Sudan. The Military Council of Sudan and the civilian protesters have still not agreed on who will lead a proposed sovereign council. Each side wants the controlling say inside it. In May, the African Union warned the Sudan Military Council against holding onto power, threatening to suspend Sudan from its activities after 60 days. But since then, the African Union has sent technical support to Khartoum to assist in the political transition. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Meanwhile, protesters are vowing to stay put, even as the Transitional Military Council and opposition leaders inch closer to a deal. This comes hours after the two sides announced that agreement to a 3-year transitional period.
The Transitional Military Council might have managed to convince opposition leaders to a 3-year transitional period. However, protesters say they will not relent until their demands are met.
Honestly, it hasn't met our expectations, but we are hopeful that moving forward, things will get better.
But there are those who agree that decisions reached between the military leaders and opposition representatives is good progress. However, some feel that the process is slow and the 3-year transitional period is too long and not sustainable.
I don't know why the Transitional Military Council waited until the events on Nile Street happened. Why do they keep delaying this? These decisions are only issued on paper and for the media, but we haven't seen anything tangible on the ground yet. We want something practical.
This sit-in camp is related to a number of demands, not just one. One of our first and main demands was a civilian government. But there are other things that also go without saying. For example, trying the wrongdoers.
Gunfire rocked Khartoum on Monday as a section of security forces sought to disrupt the sit-in. Daniel Arokmoy, CGTN.
Well, let's bring you more on this. We're now joined by CGTN's Yasser Hakim from Cairo. Yasser, this is obviously significant progress in terms of this news from Sudan. What is the latest?
Well, at the moment, the developments are very quick. Just less than half an hour ago, some gunfire shots were heard around the area where there's a sit-in. There's no sign of any or news of any casualties so far, but this happened while the military was trying to remove roadblocks that were placed by the demonstrators in the area close to the presidential palace. The army says it wanted to remove the roadblocks so the streets can be opened for the civilians to move around. The demonstrators are saying, yes, there has been good progress. Yes, they are positive about the negotiations, but the demonstrations will continue until a total deal is signed between the military council and the opposition, and that it will start to be implemented on the ground, and that's when the sit-in might be put off. So at this point, this is still ongoing now. At the other side, the military council said that it has arrested one man who is suspected of the attack that killed 4 people and a police and an army soldier on Monday from the demonstrators, and this man is a member of a militia that is related to the former vice president of Omar al-Bashir, Asad Taha, who is the vice president of former president Omar al-Bashir, and that he is among around 180 suspects who have been the suspects for the attack that took place on the demonstrators a few days ago, on Monday, and that the investigation is ongoing to arrest more of those suspects. Back to you.
Now, of course, we know that when it comes to this deal, this agreement, there are still some details that need to be worked out. But Yasser, considering the extent to which this is really uncharted territory for Sudan, is there a sense that this agreement will hold?
I think maybe tonight, or if you say tomorrow morning, early morning, will be a really important time to know how things will go. It's very crucial timing because 90% of the agreement is done. There's still 10%, according to the head of the military council, but this 10% is concerning the formation of the transitional council. The transitional council is the one that will oversee the transitional period that will oversee the cabinet that will be established and the parliament and the elections. So the problem right now in the discussions and negotiations is on the formation. Obviously, the opposition, they want a majority to be from the civilians. The army wants the head of the transitional council to be from the military. And this is a sticking point that's still under negotiations, and we understand negotiations will go on throughout the night for this final point. If this goes through, then obviously we expect a positive news. Obviously, the next 3 years, we'll see how the relationship will be between the civilian government, the civilian forces, the opposition and the political parties, and the military. How they will manage to implement the agreement they will sign, how they will manage to live together, to take decisions together without any clashes or different ideas. Another issue is obviously the divisions between the political parties themselves, the civilians themselves. We have now a number of political parties, and each one has its own ideas, its own decisions, and we can see contradictions and divisions between them. So how will they be able to unite themselves throughout those important 3 years for the transitional period to go smoothly?
Indeed, that is the big question, remains to be seen. Thank you so much, Yasser Hakim, joining us there live from Cairo. Now, UN aid agencies have expressed their concern over the dramatically deteriorating humanitarian situation in Tripoli. They have stressed that more needs to be done to protect all non-combatants caught up in the battle for the Libyan capital. The weeks of fighting have killed more than 430 people and displaced more than 55,000. CGTN's Thuli Shabalala has more.
Libya's UN-backed government has been under siege for over a month now. Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar and his Libyan National Army have struggled to maintain momentum on their advance on Tripoli. They have faced a counter-offensive by troops aligned with the Government of National Accord. Aid agencies in Libya have called on a UN resolution to support people caught in fighting around Tripoli.
As it stands, the clashes are definitely intensifying, and we have not noticed a lot of differences since the beginning of the armed conflict on 4th of April.
From 5 April until 9 May, 454 dead and 2,154 wounded.
The violence has uprooted thousands of Libyans.
UNHCR is in a race against time to evacuate people out of these detention centres as quickly as possible, and we urge the international community to come forward with offers of evacuation, humanitarian corridors, or whatever it takes to get people out of harm's way. The UNHCR has repeatedly called that at this time nobody should be returned to Libya, that there are no safe ports there, and we cannot consider this to be a rescue if people are being returned to dire conditions inside Tripoli detention centres.
Clashes remain deadlocked in the front lines around the capital. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. At least 17 soldiers killed and 11 missing after an ambush in Niger. And the UN Security Council renews its mandate of interim security force for Abyei in South Sudan.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice. Reports from Niger say at least 17 soldiers have been killed in an ambush near the border with Mali. 11 others are still missing. Now, according to a government spokesperson, the attack happened near the town of Tongo. This is the same town where militants affiliated with ISIL killed 4 U.S. soldiers drawn from the special forces. 4 other soldiers from Niger were also killed in that 2017 attack. To South Sudan now, where a public opinion survey has revealed that 80% of locals feels that security is improving across the country. The UN, which has been supporting the country's peace process, says the report is a good start. However, it is still putting pressure on South Sudan's leaders to ensure a full return to peace. CGTN's Patrick Oyet has more.
It seems to be a step in the right direction. The majority of people here in South Sudan believe security is better now than it was a year ago. That's according to a survey carried out in January and February. Despite 79% of the people having had at least one family member die as a result of the 6-year armed conflict in the country, 89% say they are hopeful that peace will return to the country in the coming year. The UN is pledging its support for the country's peace deal implementation. It says it's already providing experts to help in the effort to reunite the various armed forces and wants to see improved dialogue and meetings among different political parties, especially between President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar.
They are going to be sitting in a transitional government ultimately, and it's a good thing to do is to have meetings before that happens so they don't start on day one completely from cold start.
The public opinion survey is the first to be carried out in South Sudan since war broke out in 2013, and the majority of people here say the presence of the UN in the country has made them feel safer, adding that they believe the UN is doing a better job today than a year ago, and they are hopeful this could be the beginning of lasting peace in the country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
The United Nations Security Council has adopted a resolution to extend the mandate of the UN Interim Security Force for Abyei for another 6 months. The changes include reduction of troops and raising the police ceiling in efforts to address security in Abyei.
The Council has decided to reduce the troop ceiling to 3,550 with a further decrease of 585 troops as of October 2019. The resolution has also increased the authorized police ceiling to 640 police personnel, including 148 individual police officers and 3 formed police units.
The changes in this mandate are modest, but they are important. Increasing the number of police in UNISFA while decreasing the number of peacekeepers helps to address criminality, the primary security concern in Abyei. Police forces trained to address law enforcement challenges are best equipped to support local residents. Adding a civilian deputy head of mission expands UNISFA's capacity to manage local-level reconciliation efforts and to engage with the parties as they seek to address outstanding challenges.
The South Sudanese ambassador urged the Council to support the parties in achieving the final status for the region.
The interest of the Republic of South Sudan has been a clear plan for the status of the people of the Dinka Ngok, which are clearly spelled in different agreement and legal arbitration. Mr. President, to conclude, once again, we would like to assure that the government of the Republic of South Sudan is committed to the implementation of the mandate, and as such, Abyei remain our shared sovereign responsibility until a final status is determined.
The Council's decision comes amid escalating tensions as southern Sudan prepares to formally declare its independence from Sudan. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
And to South Africa now, where China's commitment to funding an African student scholarship program is expected to help cultivate the next generation of leaders. The move has been broadly welcomed by many in academia, especially in the Western Cape. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more.
As part of an important relationship based on mutual growth and prosperity, China has made education one of the fundamental pillars of its relationship with Africa. And in a commitment some academics have called ambitious and encouraging, China will be providing 50,000 scholarships to African students, which is more than anything that has ever been seen.
This is bigger than the total number combined of scholarships from all 28 countries in the European Union, and far larger than the United States with, for example, its Fulbright scheme. So that's a much needed gaining of skills for Africa's new generation of professionals and business.
The scholarship program will provide critical skills at tertiary level in areas such as bioscience, renewable energy, aquacultural studies, as well as vocational training. South Africa's close political partnership with China may also help boost its space science ambitions, but so can the rest of the continent.
We are both members of BRICS, which includes a space cooperation dimension, and of course we also in FOCAC and the Belt Road Initiative, and China might well think of offering sharing of data of satellite images for free, because African countries are always pressed by foreign exchange squeezes.
The scholarship also allows for the training of 1,000 high-caliber students in 10 social and developmental workshops for broader access to skills and knowledge. But students from marginalized communities may benefit the most due to the financial burden the bursaries alleviate. For many, studying in China has already provided a host of benefits.
In China, like their engineering level, it's next level. And even with operations management, I know with them, they work well. And I've seen students from our school CPUT doing business and doing operations management actually going to China, and I've seen how it has changed their lives.
For now, though, Chinese and African universities have also been encouraged to build new partnerships so that the scholarship program has a platform with which it can grow to include even greater educational exchanges. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
And let's go to Beijing now, where the Conference on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations has kicked off. More than 2,000 officials and representatives from Asia as well as other continents are participating. The Asian Culture Carnival held tonight is one of the conference's highlights. More than 8,000 performers took to the stage at the National Stadium. Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed the audience at the beginning of the event. He lauded the diversity and vitality of Asian civilizations and called on Asian countries to work together to create a better future.
The Chinese people sincerely hope that all Asian nations could look after each other and ride on the same boat while we are marching forward along with the world and making progress in line with the international trend. Let's join hands together to co-create a better future for Asia and the world.
Well, earlier in the day, the Chinese president called for respect between different cultures. He said attempts to change and even replace other cultures would only lead to destructive results. So Yun reports.
Building community with a shared future through enhancing exchanges and mutual learning among Asian civilizations. Delivering a keynote speech at the opening ceremony, Chinese President Xi Jinping said that human civilizations have become richer and more colorful through exchanges and mutual learning. President Xi emphasized the different civilizations are equally rewarding, and the relations between them in the modern world should be addressed in a peaceful and friendly approach. And he said there should be no clash of civilizations as long as people are able to appreciate the beauty of them all.
文明只有姹紫嫣红之别，但绝无高低优劣之分。
There are only different cultures, no superior or inferior ones. Those who think their races or cultures are better and try to change or replace other cultures are wrong in their mindsets and are doomed to fail.
Evolving for thousands of years, Asian civilization has deep roots in the lands and has been enriched by other civilizations through communications. President Xi put forward 4 proposals, including treating each other with mutual respect and equality, creating fertile ground for all cultures to bloom, keeping an open mind to foreign cultures, and innovating to catch up with the change of times. He also said the development of Chinese culture is a good example of open communication between different peoples.
中华文明是亚洲文明的重要组成部分。
The Chinese culture is a vital component of Asian civilizations. It has been developing with the principles of inheriting tradition, innovation, and inclusiveness. The Chinese people have always embraced the philosophy of befriending our neighbors and being at peace with all foreign nations.
President Xi emphasizes that today's China is not just China's China. It is also Asia's China and the world's China. China in the future will embrace the world and contribute with open mind and dynamic culture. Living in a diverse and multilateral world, many people say that various systems and cultures can and should coexist. Different as we might be, an open attitude and enhanced communication mechanism will offer us a more dynamic path to embrace diversity and building a community of shared future for mankind. So, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, on the 1st of May, Chinese President Xi Jinping's article was published in the 9th edition of the Qishi Journal. The article, entitled Exchanges and Mutual Learning Between Civilization, stressed the importance of a drive for progress towards human civilization, world peace and development. It also called for respect between civilizations and global peace. A South African scholar, Sanusha Naidu, has hailed the article, saying the theme promotes a culture of inclusion.
Listen, it doesn't start with this kind of universalism from a Western ideological perspective, but rather there's an existence of shared values, common prosperity, and universalism that comes before this notion of the world as we know it from the kind of Western philosophy. And I think that for me was more around the strategic relevance and why the theme of this Asian conference on values and systems, etc., has become important, because we are arguing that there's a civilization that existed before this kind of modernity that emerged. For Asian countries, there's definitely an interesting value system that goes beyond just the fact of how we interpret it in the context of what we call the Human Rights Compact, or, for example, what we may call natural rights, etc. I mean, if you go back and you look at some of the values that we learn in terms of political philosophy, there's a lot of overlap between the Asian value system and in terms of the Western value system. Perhaps the defining difference or discerning difference between the two is how do you define it in the context of the personal, the individual versus the state or the collective.
Well, let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thanks, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa vows to speed up economic reforms to lure investors. And Dangote Refinery gives 120 local contractors about $368 million worth of contracts.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market, it's colorful, vibrant and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa has vowed to fast-track economic reforms in order to attract more investors to the country. Now, he made those remarks during discussions on land reform at an investor conference, which was hosted by Goldman Sachs Group in Johannesburg. Ramaphosa drew a direct line between the formation of the ruling African National Congress in 1912 and the party's current land reform program, saying land had remained at the core of the party's message over the past 107 years. Now, he also said that land reform and expropriation without compensation will take place in an orderly manner, with no land grabs as happened elsewhere.
Here in South Africa, we've always adhered to the rule of law. We have a constitution, and we are going to insist that everything is done in terms of our constitution, in terms of the rule of law. And I've said repeatedly ad nauseum that there will never be land grabs. We will not allow land grabs to happen. We will ensure that the process of land reform takes place in an orderly manner, in a manner where everyone fully participates. So I've often said too, even foreign investors have no fear. And I've said, there's just no way we can invite foreign investors to come to our country. We say, come, invest, and tomorrow we take your land away. That is not going to happen.
Well, let's head to Nigeria now, where the Dangote Refinery and Petrochemical Company is awarding about 120 local contractors about $368 million worth of contracts. The aim, they say, is to deepen its input in the Nigerian Local Content Development Initiative. Now, in partnership with the Lagos State Government and Siemens, Dangote hopes to create employment opportunities at the refinery's construction site. The company has now embarked on a landmark integrated project regarded as the largest industrial complex in the history of Africa. Meanwhile, Uganda says its national carrier is ready for its first commercial flights after securing routes in the region. 2 passenger planes ordered from Canadian manufacturer Bombardier arrived in the country in April. Now, the deliveries are part of the country's efforts to revive Ugandan Airlines after 17 years without a national carrier. Well, CGTN's Isabel Nakiria reports from Kampala.
Uganda Airlines will be taken to the skies in 2 months. The country has secured 7 destinations within the region for its commercial flights, subject to further certification from airports. The routes include Mogadishu, Dar es Salaam, Mombasa, Bujumbura and Juba.
We're now talking to the different airports where we'll be flying to give us the approvals that we need to land there. We're recruiting. We've done the first phase of recruitment.
The aircraft are now undergoing the final phase of certification from the Civil Aviation Authority. Uganda Airlines joins the aviation industry at a time when many regional routes have been struggling to stay profitable. The government says it will support its carrier.
We shall prioritize our airline, we government officials. Instead of flying those other airlines, we shall prioritize our own.
There has also been concern about high fares on routes within the region run by many companies. Uganda Airlines says its ticket prices will be competitive.
We've done a benchmarking with all the airlines in the region that fly to the points where we'll be going on our schedule, and our fares will be affordable. At the same time, they will be good enough for the airline to keep flying.
The airline was wound up nearly 2 decades ago due to mismanagement and misappropriation of funds. The new management says it will not make the same mistakes. Uganda says it's ordered 2 more CRJ 900 aircrafts and 2 jetliners expected in the country by 2021. It's hoped Uganda Airlines will ease travel within the region and boost tourism as well as business. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
And moving on now, Tunisia's Africa Business Council is an NGO set up by the private sector to promote the North African country. Now, it also proposes policies to access African markets. For the first time, the NGO has released a study on Africa's most important ports, its logistics and promising maritime commercial routes. Here's CGTN's Anan Ashaushi with the details.
The African Center for Competitive Intelligence, stemming from the Tunisia Africa Business Council, TABC, conducted a study entitled Transport and Logistics Corridors in Africa, a Tunisian Perspective, aimed at making the African markets more accessible to Tunisian investors and decision makers.
This is an important study for Tunisian businessmen and enterprises to know the exact location of key African ports, the logistic flow per port, but especially to plan transporting containers from Rades port in Tunis to Abidjan, Dakar, Tema in Ghana, Cameroon, Gabon and other countries.
The TABC study includes all the economic and logistical data related to the international transport of 20 African countries to give decision makers clarity on multilateral cooperation relations and to the interested exporting operators a commercial expansion on the continent.
We valued the exact transportation costs for 20 to 40 feet containers from Bradis port to the most important ports in Africa. From now on, a Tunisian businessman or enterprise will have access to all the necessary information to facilitate export of our goods and products.
The state is determined to consolidate its economic presence in Africa.
The future of business is in Africa. Tunisia believes that integrating the African market will boost the economy and growth. We welcome any initiative that will reinforce Tunisia's position in Africa.
The African Center for Competitive Intelligence has developed monographs of several African countries, maritime entry points in Africa, and the main ports and corridors of North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa. The Tunisia Africa Business Council has specified that the first edition of the study, Transport and Logistics Corridors in Africa, a Tunisian Perspective, also aims to attract the attention of international investors to the opportunity to position Tunisia as a logistical and industrial hub for Africa, Africa being a reservoir for global growth for the coming decades. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, on the international stage, the trade war between China and the U.S. rages on. Let's take a look at the economic effects on both sides with Owen Fairclough in Washington.
They may be continuing to inflict pain on each other by ramping up tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of goods that they trade with each other, but the US and China are still talking to each other, and yet US President Donald Trump is determined to keep the tone and keep the pressure up against China in an effort to change what he calls unfair trade practices. Here's the US President before he departed for Louisiana.
I think we're winning it. We're going to be collecting over $100 billion in tariffs. Our people, if they want, they can buy from someplace else other than China, or they can really, the ideal is make their product in the USA.
But international trade is never that simple, and Trump was in Louisiana to visit a new liquefied gas plant right at the time that the US is celebrating its energy revolution that's seen it come from nowhere to become one of the biggest exporters of LNG in the world, and at a time when China is becoming the second biggest importer of this commodity. And yet China wants to hit the US with tariffs of 25% on those gas exports. This at a time when US gas exports to China have fallen dramatically as this trade war has escalated. China is determined to prove that it can buy its products elsewhere, and it's not just gas. Soybean prices in the rural Midwest of America have fallen to an 11-year low, with China dramatically cutting the amount it buys from the United States. And China's foreign ministry wanted to remind the US that it can source its goods elsewhere.
We advise the U.S. to take heed of the reaction from the international community, listen to people from all walks of life, consider how its own interests could benefit or be harmed, form a clear understanding of the current situation, and come back to the right track as soon as possible.
But commodities aren't the only ones involved in all of this. Many US companies are also trying to cope with the fallout of this escalation in the trade battle between the US and China. Take Apple, for example. We know already that iPhone sales have been slowing somewhat. China is a major manufacturer of the iPhone and supplier for Apple. And Apple is, many analysts say Apple will suffer from higher prices should this trade war continue. Boeing as well exports its products to China. According to one influential Chinese newspaper, China is considering cutting its purchases of Boeing products. But at least these two sides are talking to each other. At the last G20 summit in Argentina, President Xi Jinping of China and Trump negotiated a truce in this trade battle, which led to this current round of negotiations. Trump and Xi will meet again at the next G20 summit in Japan in June, and many optimists are hoping that these two men can resolve this trade conflict. Back to you.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up on Global Business Africa, as Zimbabwe releases its medium-term finance review, we take a look at how power crisis is affecting mining production in the country. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Lucia. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, Egypt safeguarding monuments that date back thousands of years.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The fire at the Notre Dame in Paris has triggered concerns over the welfare of monuments around the world. We take a look at how that's playing out here in Africa, and especially Egypt, which owns a third of the monuments worldwide. Yasser Hakim has more.
Egypt's monuments that date back thousands of years are considered priceless treasures that millions of tourists long to visit every year. But some of it has faced looting and destruction in the aftermath of the 2011 uprising.
The revolution, when it started in Egypt, January 25th, 2011, almost everything stopped in the Ministry of Antiquities. The main source of the income, those are the tourists. The tickets that they pay in our sites, this is the income that we use for constructing our museums. This is the amount of money that we use for excavations, for consolidations, for restoration, for all of our work.
From 2014 upwards, extensive efforts were underway to restore the looted items and renovate the damaged monuments.
We have excavated and restored damaged areas in Abdul Naga site and Asasaf in Upper Egypt. We reopened the Queen Nefertari temple and new excavations around Karnak temple. These are only some of our latest renovations.
A series of pharaonic sites that were closed down for security fears were reopened over the last couple of years for foreign visitors.
This is a message to the rest of the world that Egypt is now safe to visit and that we are working hard to preserve our monuments and are taking good care of it. We've also had discoveries in Menya and Saqqara, which shows that the Ministry of Tourism and Ministry of Antiquities are working together in different cities and locations to ensure visitors enjoy the best experience in Egypt.
The latest to be unveiled is the statue of King Ramses at the Karnak temple in Luxor. A number of tombs and monuments have also been unearthed nearby after hard work to excavate and restore the ancient sites.
Today we are celebrating the official opening of the temple after finishing all the restoration work done here in the temple. This temple have a very nice inscriptions with a lot of details. Artists make such magnificent inscriptions with all the colors that we can see, especially after making the old restoration done here in the temple.
In the last few years, the Egyptian government has placed strong emphasis on preserving its ancient heritage in the best condition, especially that tourism has become a major source of hard currency revenue for the government. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And coming up in your sports news. We meet the South African cricket all-rounder targeting more success with the Proteas.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Here we start with cricket news. South Africa and Pakistan have drawn their 4-match one-day international